Welcome to a new yes-no debate, a debate where we only ask yes-no questions to each other on a topic we disagree about. And today's topic is, can Esperanto solve the worldwide communication problem? And for this, I have invited two guests with an opposing view. Here are Boris, Mandirola, and Tim Keeley. Thanks for joining. And Michael, please introduce yourself and also let us know your summary on the topic.
Okay, so my name is Boris Mandirola, and I am an activist in the Esperanto meeting. I have been the president of the World Esperanto Youth Organization for 2 years, and I'm also active at different level, local, national, and international one. So I speak several Latin languages, and beside that, I also speak English and Esperanto. And my position is that Esperanto is the best option that we have today for international communication, thanks to the fact that it does not belong to a people. It does not belong to one or several national culture. And also because of its regularity, its lack of exceptions, that can make it easier to learn than any other language. At least that's my experience and the shared experience with many other fellow Esperanto speakers.
All right, and you agree to the sentence, you say yes, Esperanto can solve the worldwide communication problem.
I agree that Esperanto is the best solution that we have today for international communication. Of course, Esperanto, as any other mean of communication, should be put in the framework of language justice. But as an international language, I suppose that Esperanto is the best option that we have today.
All right, thank you a lot, Michael. And now, Tim, please the same.
Right. Hi, everybody. I'm Tim Keeley. I live in Japan, where I lived most of my life, Japanese citizen. My answer to this question is no, for a number of reasons. One reason would be that you can't convince everybody to learn Esperanto. They have much more motivation to learn other languages, in particular English and general around the world. But in Asia, some people think that English dominates, but it really doesn't. English dominates in Singapore, Malaysia, more or less, Hong Kong, a few places. But here in Japan, for example, you don't get very far in English. A very small percentage of the population can understand the conversation we're having right now. And so, I'll just leave it at that right now and then address each issue that comes up. But I think it's not necessarily the easiest language to learn because it's very eurocentric, not just vocabulary, but also the syntax and the cultural background. Cultural background, in other words, I think that influences what has to be said. And I can explain what I mean later. Or should I explain it now?
All right. Thank you, Tim.
Later, okay.
Oh, I didn't want to interrupt you. Okay. Then thank you, Tim. Thank you, Michael. So great. As said, we will discuss this by asking yes/no questions, and depending on the answer, it will be decided who asks the next question. There is a flowchart of the process. Our guests are already familiar with this, but if you want to read more at the moment, you can check yesnodebate.org. Here we will just start with the debate, and at the beginning we need to decide who will ask the first question. So I have now a coin in one of my hands, and I'm asking Michael to pick a hand.
I pick your left hand.
This one?
Yes.
Tim, are you okay with the right hand?
Sure.
Or you want to also have the left hand?
No, that's fine.
You're okay with the right hand. So okay, if the coin has the right hand, the coin is in the right hand, Tim will ask the first question. If it's in the left hand, Michael will ask the first question. And where's the coin? It's on my right hand. So Tim is
Okay.
has the first question. We will try this for 30 minutes and let's see how far we can get. So,
Okay.
Tim, please, the scene is yours.
Okay, so one of the reasons that many people advocate using Esperanto to an attempt to solve world communication problem or improve world communication is they say that's the easiest language to learn. So do you believe that's true for anybody? It's the easiest language to learn, no matter where you're from, no matter what your mother tongue is.
It depends. I think that considering any language that does not belong to your family, Esperanto would be easier than that language. However, I acknowledge that even if it was not the case when I learned other Latin languages than my native ones, I can imagine that you can have a very close language in your language family that could, in that specific situation, be easier than Esperanto.
Mm-hmm.
So may you maybe phrase the yes option and the no option to the question? So it's the easiest if, and it's not the easiest
if you do not have another very close language in your language family.
Mm-hmm.
And then no if you have one.
Yes.
Okay.
All right.
Good.
Mm-hmm. Because it depends, Tim continues.
Okay, so I would generally agree with that because when a language is closer to your family, for example, Spanish, Italian, Slovak, Czech, or Polish, Czech, or Russian, Ukrainian, etc., especially among Slavic languages, they're definitely easier for a monolingual than Esperanto. Okay, so is Esperanto Eurocentric in terms of vocabulary?
Yes. It is Eurocentric in terms of its roots.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Is Esperanto Eurocentric in terms of its syntax, its grammar?
About the syntax, actually the word order is free, even if the standard option is a subject, verb, object. So I would say that it depends on what you mean. There are several features that you can find in other European languages, but these features are not restricted uniquely to European languages. And on the other side, some features that you can find in several European languages, I can think, for example, as indeterminative articles are not present in Esperanto.
They don't have definite articles. No definite articles.
Indefinite articles, no.
I don't know whether they exist in Esperanto. They don't exist.
Esperanto has only one definite article and does not have indefinite articles.
Oh, it has a definite article. It
While
has
in a European language,
but does have
exactly. While in
Okay.
European languages, for example, at least in the ones that I speak in Latin and Germanic languages, we have both.
Yeah, Slavic languages no, except for Bulgarian and Macedonian. Okay.
Yeah.
Do I continue? Yes.
I understand it was a depends on the vocabulary, right?
Yes.
So yes, if you look at the vocabulary, no, if you look at other features like I heard grammar, right? It's not so Eurocentric.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Then Tim continues. Mm-hmm.
All right. So the next point I want to make is that actually, if you look at, I'm going to give a view from Asia. And when I say a view from Asia, most of the languages spoken in this region, but that are not Indo-European. So we put Hindi and Nepali, for example, aside from it. But taking a look at Chinese all the way down through Indonesia, Japanese, Korean, etc., certain characteristics. For example, plurals, inanimate plurals. So in these languages, again, Chinese, Vietnamese, Thai, Lao, Japanese, Korean, Indonesian, Malay to a certain extent, we do not distinguish between singular and plural for inanimate, objects, not human objects. Okay, So, do you think the fact that this, I see it as that's a cultural psychological point, because it's like a cognitive category. How do you what you need to categorize, how you categorize things in the language? Do you think that why would you have that in Esperanto? Because it's simpler not to have it. So if Esperanto is so easy, why would that exist? Well, that's not a yes/no question. Okay, so would it not be better if Esperanto did not require you to distinguish between singular and plural in the case of inanimate objects?
I do not agree, because I think that being able to express the plural, it's something that is an added value in the communication. And on the other side, if I compare Esperanto with all other languages that I speak, the plural is extremely regular, so it's always about adding one specific sound at the end of the word, whilst all other languages have far more complex plural systems. And I think that can be an important difficulty.
Okay, so it's a no, I understand. Then, Michael, it's your turn to ask questions.
Yes. So my question is, do you think that it is an added value that people are able to communicate internationally?
Yes.
Okay. And do you think that to have a common second language at international level, I'm talking as a second, supposing that we are having policy to protect all native languages in their own reference territory, but do you agree that to have a common standard as a second language for international communication is useful and is something that we should wish?
It depends. So, yes, in certain fields, for example, medicine, engineering, things like that, that tends to be English now, but not always. And generally, worldwide, from a worldwide view. In other areas, perhaps not. Because if you, I don't think that you're not giving them people a choice. If they choose, for example, they to be in a field of medicine, and they realize that they have to perhaps learn English, or at least passively to understand it for papers and such like that, then yeah. But in general, promoting just one language as a second language around the world, no. I think it would have a negative effect.
But I understand. So you say depends. Yes, it is useful for fields like medicine, but no, it is not useful in
in
fields.
In general, to say to the whole population, you should learn. For example, okay, so basically here the idea is Esperanto is going to help solve the problem. So, in other words, say to the whole world, everybody learn Esperanto. And then also,
I'm just trying to find the two versions of the depends.
Okay, so well, maybe I've lost maybe I've lost the point of the question. If I can hear it one more time, please.
Okay,
yes.
So my question is: do you think that something that we should wish that people would be able to have international communication, and to facilitate that it would be better to have an agreed, I would say, yes, an agreed lingua franca for that?
Okay, so that's actually two questions. The first one I said yes to, And then
the first one you have already answered. So.
Right, okay. And then the second one, so agreed upon lingua franca. Okay. So then the answer would be no. Simply, in that case.
Okay.
Because then that means the whole world.
You can elaborate.
My background for the no answer is that the whole world would have to learn this agreed upon. That's we're going to promote for the whole world to learn this language. Okay, so now back to
Because the no, then it's the same as again.
Okay, so I'm going to use this opportunity to go back to your answer to my question about plurals, because I found it very interesting that you speak European languages, and to you felt that it's added information, it's necessary, it adds something to it, and so they're not so difficult in Esperanto. In some languages, they are las, or they have cases, etc. But Esperanto is very simple and straightforward. Well, the language I speak most of my life, in terms of hours, is Japanese, and then a language I'm always dealing with in teaching and such is Chinese, Thai, etc. So we don't miss it at all. It's not necessary. If I say in Japanese, hon wasareta. Hon is book. I don't have a book, the book, no. Book or books, no. There's no difference. But we find no loss in our communication of not saying I forgot my books rather than I forgot my book. So that is what I'm pointing out, is that people don't tend to see it until they really deeply live in a different culture where the language structure is quite different, what's required and not required in terms of communication. I know now I have to bring this to a question. So do you see what I mean by that? That it is Eurocentric, actually. I wouldn't even say Eurocentric. It's centered towards those languages which required. All the European languages do plurals. Okay, that's definite articles, no, but plurals, yes. So you said it wasn't Eurocentric. So do that aspect?
European.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I acknowledge that I am European, and of course that is shaping my point of view.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there was a question, and you have
so the question is, do you see that it's
Eurocentric? And I am European, yes.
Yes, and so Esperanto in grammar-wise, in that sense, is also, let's call that grammar. Okay, so it's not syntax necessarily; it's grammar. Falls under the umbrella of grammar. Okay, so another example I would give. So I see it as a cognitive category. In other words, so the European languages require you to distinguish between singular and plural all the time. Okay, so then the next thing would be tense. So does Esperanto have tense in the sense like present tense, past tense, future tense, etc.?
Yes.
Okay. So the languages we're talking about here, take away Japanese and Korean, but then we'll just, because we have tense, but we don't conjugate for a person. So Chinese, Thai, Lao, Vietnamese, Indonesian, Malay, etc. So we don't use tense in those languages. If we're going to say eat, like 吃饭 is eat. Okay, so that's 昨天吃饭. Yesterday I ate. 明天要吃. Okay, tomorrow I have to eat something. So I'm going to do it by context. But we have other words to say that's completion. 吃过了 in Chinese, so 过, showing a completed act of eating. But we don't have tense. So is it fair to ask the majority, well, not a majority, let's say Chinese, Vietnamese, Thai, Lao, Indonesian, Malay, add up all the population of those speakers, I believe we're at least at 35-40% of the world. So if we're looking for an international language, say this is a solution, is it okay to say it's Esperanto, which requires them to learn to get used to tense? And believe me, people can understand it. I mean, I've been communicating here in Asia. Okay, go ahead.
We hear that question, so Michael?
Yes.
Is it fair? Mm-hmm.
You can elaborate, you don't have to.
Yes, I think that, of course, Esperanto has a grammar. I did not say that it does not have. And, of course, it has several features that are shared with several European languages and are not shared with others. My point is that that Esperanto is not simply a synthesis of the most common features of European languages, but it has features that are very common in several Indo-European languages.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other side, it has features that are less common in Indo-European languages. Like, for example, if we look at the way of forming words, of compounding words, that's something that exists quite a lot in German, but it's not so common in most of the other Indo-European languages. So Esperanto has features that are common with many European languages and features that are not. And I think that the most difficult point when someone is learning a new language are the exception, not the concept itself that you have a certain grammar feature, but how difficult is to apply that grammar feature. And the grammar features that Esperanto has are in that way that you have a very regular system to apply.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, so Tim can continue.
Oh, okay. So, yes. So all the languages I mentioned also have grammatical features. This says that the grammar is different. Okay, so not using tense is a grammatical feature. All right. I mean, there's even some Chinese speakers who say, "Oh, Chinese doesn't have grammar." Oh, it definitely does. There's right things to say and wrong things to say things. Okay. So moving on from that, because that's touching on whether it's necessarily universal in terms of, I'm saying it's very Eurocentric and not in terms of the vocabulary, but also in terms of the grammar and cognitive categories, the way you categorize the world. The fact that you need singular and plural. Okay. Do you think that if Esperanto was promoted worldwide by governments, etc., almost, do you think that the government should force their people in school to learn Esperanto instead of giving them a choice, or in the school systems, for example, where they require everybody to learn English or some other language? Do you think that should be substituted with Esperanto?
It depends. I think that today, in the current situation of this year, I would support it as an optative language. Of course, if there is an international agreement towards Esperanto as international language, I think that it should be made compulsory in the education system, as well as several other languages are today compulsory in the education system of many places in the world. And I think that would be the key, actually, to make the language taught in the school in order to spread its usage at another scale than today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You said depends, so what is the no version? Or you want to change to yes? You can also...
Well, I would say that the depends is that there is an international agreement. So I would not insist to have it compulsory in all schools of one country without more shared, at least among the several countries, to require it as a compulsory subject.
Okay, so yes if there's an agreement, no if there's no agreement.
Yeah, I would support it as an optative language, or as an optative language in that case.
Mm-hmm.
It depends, so Tim can continue.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then next move on to a big difference between Esperanto and natural languages, and that is the history and the cultural background. So let's do general culture, and that is culture, not deep culture or psychological aspects of it, but let's say literature and film and music and poetry, etc. So when do you then promote using Esperanto in all those areas? Do you think it should be promoted in making new films and literature and music, etc.?
Yes, I do.
So,
I do, because I think that
what culture would it represent in
value.
that case? Mm-hmm. Mm.
And that's
Okay,
the
so
Sorry,
what
this is not a
would
yes
be
no
the
question.
could you, but is it possible though? Let's say
Can you give an example? You can say a yes no
yeah.
question would be, can you give an example of what culture it should represent? And if
Okay,
Michael
yeah,
can give an example, then he can say yes and give one.
Okay, so I'll put it. So, would you then say perhaps like a film that's normally made in Japanese, would they should make it in Esperanto instead?
It depends. If the story, I would say, if the plot is in Japan and it's related to Japanese culture, I think that it would be more natural to record it in Japan and to record it in Japanese.
Mm-hmm.
I would see several other situations where it would be good, it would be an added value to record that film in Esperanto. So I think that Esperanto should be one of the options for a cultural production. I don't see why Esperanto should not be in that role. And on the other side, I would not want Esperanto to monopolize the cultural production.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Still my turn?
It depends, yes. You're still your turn.
It depends.
By the way, you can also give the question out of the hand if you just are curious.
I'll pass the questions to you if that's okay. Yeah. I'm willing to answer questions now. So you
Okay.
can ask the question.
So my question is, do you think that being able to use the own native language in international communication is a privilege?
Yes. Those who background, those right now, but so right now, you would probably think, okay, those who speak English as a mother tongue have an advantage, an unfair advantage in many fields, and yes, that exists. But worldwide view, no, it's not always the case with just English. Okay, so for example, here in Asia, Chinese can be very important. Outside of China, also.
I totally agree. And my second question is, do you think that also at a collective level, if the language that is spoken as a first language by one people of a certain country, if that language has a higher power at international level, that collectively these people, this country, have privilege?
The country as a whole, because the language is used for international communication?
Yes.
No. And background? Take a look at French in the past. Just because it became touted as the language of diplomacy, on and on, it didn't give France an inordinate amount of power.
Okay.
I disagree.
It's a no. It will be your turn again, Tim, but you can still also pass it to Michael if you want to hear his next question.
So do you think it's possible to promote Esperanto as as an international language to the extent where it actually solves international communication issues?
So it is
a possible
yes.
goal to reach. Yeah.
So if the question is to use it for international communication, well, it is already the case that it is used to international communication. If you mean to be used at a larger extent, so large that it could be the option to solve international communication, I think that yes, but only if there is the political will to challenge the current situation and to acknowledge the privileges that I acknowledge and you don't, that's the privilege at the collective level, and so to change the situation towards another option that does not imply some countries to be in a more advanced, more, I would say, hegemonic position.
So here it's a depends. Yes, if there's a political will. No, if there's.
Well, it's a yes, but of course, I explained the condition under that yes, but you can consider it as a depends.
Okay. It's still the same role. Tim can continue.
So if Esperanto is strongly promoted and it takes over the role of English as the main language learned in school by many countries around the world, not all but many, then isn't there an issue that all the communication up to date in English in all the different fields, scientific fields, cultural fields, etc., that you put it in danger of not being able to, understand it? In other words, if Esperanto is promoted so much, it doesn't have all the same thing that offer that English does it? Because English already has this stockpile of scientific and cultural treasures. Okay, they exist there in books and movies and et cetera, et cetera. Scientific literature.
I do not agree that it would be a huge loss. First of all, because translation exists and it is becoming more and more efficient and cheaper thanks to automatical translation. Second, I think that of course such transition would not be made from one day to another, so that the most recent treasure would become less and less recent, and so there would be new production that would be made in Esperanto, and the old one can be still retrieved thanks to translation and thanks to the fact that during a quite long time many people would still be speaking more languages. And actually also today we do not consider that the production in Latin have been lost, even if the overwhelming majority of the savants today do not speak Latin, but it's still available. There are still people. A minority.
I don't mean lost like that.
Latin,
I mean
less and less.
it's accessible to most people, easily accessible.
And it would be accessible, I think, through translation quite easily.
So it's a no. Then Michael may ask the next question.
Yes. So my question is related to my previous topic, that is that collective privilege. So I do not agree that there is no privilege at collective level. I can quote the grand report that have been commissioned in 2004 to study the impacts of three scenarios for international communication in European Union, and only considering European Union, it turns out that the English only option as international working language for European Union was giving a benefit of, am I talking about almost 20 years ago, 17 billions of euros per year to the United Kingdom. And that's an example. It's an example that I quote because there is a scientific study that I know about that. But it's measurable by the linguistic economy that the hegemony of the language is benefiting actually the country behind it. And we can also think about if we talk about France, so the colonial past of France and its links to these countries, also through the language, are still making business easier for French companies and French governments in these countries. So for that reason, would you consider talking about economy at least, that there is such privilege?
Oh yes, definitely. I agree.
Okay. And if we look at it from another point of view, so today there is a huge amount, still a minority in the world. English did not become a language spoken with fluency by the majority of the people, but we all agree that there is a huge amount of people speaking English as a second language that's comparable in terms of quantity to the people speaking it as a first language.
Is there
Depends how you
question?
define.
Do you agree?
It depends. Okay, so first of all, so let's say the no, because in the case of, let's say, for example, China, the population of China, so we have over 1 billion people, and so a good portion of that, I don't know the exact number, a good portion of those people speak another form of Chinese that's not the standard. So the problem is, whether you call, for example, Cantonese, Shanghainese, etc., a language or a dialect. Okay, I call it a language. Internally in China, they call it a dialect. Okay, and they try to get rid of dialects. They're making great effort. Even in Hong Kong, they're making great efforts that way. Okay, so but for all these people, their second language is standard Chinese. Okay, 普通话. And you see this repeated in many different countries. Okay, and in Nepal, much smaller scale with the population, making Nepali, even though 28% are Tibetan Burmese speakers, for example. So we see it in various countries around the world. So it's not necessarily English. I think if you take a look from certain areas of the world, yes, it seems that way. That was a no, and it depends. So let me think. Why did I say it depends?
No, it depends. I heard, right?
Okay, it depends. So
it depends,
the yes would be
Michael.
yes would be if you're talking about, if you exclude what I just said. Okay, so you say no, they're all speaking a form of Chinese. So that's the majority that I was just saying there. And then for example, Russian is a good example. Okay, so Russia still dominates all the old Soviet territories, to the extent that in Kazakhstan,
Yes,
there Kazakhstan, yeah. So Russian is a issue of, in that case, Russian destroys the local language. It's not English. I know this wasn't part of the question, but I think it leads into it, right?
yeah.
I mean, yeah.
I'm talking about English just because it's, I would say, the most visible example, but it's I totally agree that's not the only language oppressing other languages. Most national languages are doing it with the regional local languages, and some languages as Russian are still having that hegemonic role at international level. But what I wanted to say is that So we can agree that there are languages, and English is one of them, the one that is fulfilling that role, I would say, mostly, that are being hegemonic. And do you agree that in these languages, I would cite the case of English, but we can, I think, apply the same to others. The cultural production and, in a certain sense, the legitimacy of having the to be fully accepted as the representative part of the culture in that language is what is coming from the ruling part of the home countries, or at least in the case of languages that are more spoken outside of it, like English or Spanish. Still, it belongs to the biggest countries with most economic power. So do you agree that, for example, for English, what is considered as mainstream English culture, English language culture, is what is coming from the USA and the UK, and for Russian, it could be what is coming from Russia. So do you agree about that unequal consideration of the cultural production made by highly proficient speakers, depending on their country?
Yeah. That's why, yes, because that's why, for example, in Kazakhstan, you have ethnic Kazakhis, because there are Kazakh citizens who are ethnically what we would consider Slavic, and there are some who are what we would call Mongoloid Asian, and some of them don't speak Kazakhi, they speak Russian. Russian dominates, and for the reasons you're giving, economically, culturally,
Okay.
it's a stronger language.
And so, don't you agree that using as international language a language that is not linked to a single country and that is not linked historically to a certain set of dominating countries that are using that language as the main language, it would create a fairer access and a fairer reception of cultural production from different people?
Just to make sure that you don't use double negation, so you're asking, do you agree?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm not debating
It's fine.
my native
This is why I'm
language.
here.
So because whether it be English or Esperanto, in the cases that we've given about China and Russia, so you put China and Russia together, and then now we're about one-fifth the landmass of the world, and population-wise, we haven't good 30 something percent, right? Okay, so neither English or Esperanto plays a role here, and so you were saying, you talk about the hegemony of this dominant language and culture. Well, Esperanto nor English, which could change the situation for those people who would like to see, for example, Kazakh or Cantonese continue to flourish. The only way is that just okay. So we're not gonna dominate with you, Russian. We're going to change everything to English or Esperanto. No, it's not going to happen, and it doesn't make sense. So my point is that I agree there are advantages of being a native speaker of a dominant language around the world, but they're dominant in certain areas, like sometimes economy or sciences, etc. But not necessarily culturally, not necessarily on a daily basis. Again, because so I'll phrase it as a question. So do you?
So just to understand the answer, the answer to Michael's question is a no, because you don't agree what Michael
No,
Is
it
that
wouldn't
correct?
solve the problems he was talking about, because he said he was bringing the
Okay.
fact that, the issue of Russian and Chinese, etc. So somehow we're going to replace it with Esperanto or something else, and that's going to solve the problem. So no. Um, so
Okay, so it's a no, then it's your turn.
right, okay. So do you perceive that English, for example, even though it is the lingua franca in many cases, okay, and I even see Asians, speaking English to one another, even though their mother tongues are not that far apart, but far apart. Okay, Korean and Japanese meet each other. Okay, if they never say each other's language, even though they're very similar in many different ways, they're gonna need, unless the Korean know how to write kanji, characters, they're gonna have some issues. Okay, so but overall, English does not dominate a good part of the world. So, and I would say that if you travel within China and in Japan and Thailand and on and throughout Asia, only in Singapore and Malaysia will you find that most people could understand you speaking English. So most people will not understand you unless you're just saying the tourist spots. And we're talking about 45% population. So I don't understand why people argue, okay, English is dominating. No, it's not. If it were so dominant, then all these people would be able to understand English. Is that right or not?
What's the question?
Yeah.
Is it
can
really?
you just summarize it as a question?
Okay, how do I frame it as a question this way? Okay, so the fact that, for example, here in Asia, and then we can even include a good part of the old Soviet Union, that English is not necessarily dominant. That the majority of people don't understand English. Do you see that? Do you believe that? Do you perceive that as true or not?
Of course.
Okay, so if that is true, then can we say that English is playing a dominating role, hegemony, if the majority of people don't speak it?
We can still say that it's.
Okay,
yes,
please explain.
I think that even if the majority of the people do not speak it, it still has a hegemonic role, in the sense that for international communication is by far the most used option, and that the cultural production from English-speaking countries is the one that is spreading most in the world. Not the only one, but is the one that is spreading most, and that in several international organizations, in several, I would say the majority of academic context where an international work is done, the almost only option, and by far the most common default option by default, is English. And I consider that a domination, even if luckily it did not succeed to take all the linguistic space yet.
And Tim continues.
Yes. Okay. So
Well,
I agree. I agree
sorry?
that in. So I agree.
Maybe just to clarify, so I understood the question was like, do you see that English is
yes.
not a hegemony, and this is why you started with answering yes. So this is why Tim can continue. Of course, Tim can also give the question to Michael as you want.
Okay, so to clarify. Okay, so and yes, I agree that when we talk about international, certain areas, the sciences and such, and publications of academic papers, etc., that English dominates, and it's unfair. But is the solution okay? So now we're going to do it in Esperanto. So if we say okay, everybody in academia has to learn Esperanto, So do you see that as fair, given that 30-40% of the world that so vocabulary-wise, it's just not necessarily any easier than English, and you say that you could use translation in order to not be cut off from the treasure of literature in that field, etc., in the communication in that field. But now you're saying, okay, everybody has to learn Esperanto, so everybody now has a challenge to try to think in Esperanto, to express yourself about very difficult subjects. So now you say, so it's like, it sounds to me, don't you think
So the
that's like...
question is,
So the question is, isn't that kind of just like saying to those who have the advantage now, the native speakers of English, okay, now we got you? You have the same problem that we've suffered with?
so is it fair that
Well, not as a
everybody
fair
has to
thing,
learn
but
Esperanto? Is that the
is it
question?
the same thing? It's like saying those who speak English as a native tongue, and they in any of the fields where they have to use English, and say, okay, now you have to use Esperanto, and then so isn't that the same as saying, okay, it's like kind of
So
like
is
now you know how it
asking everybody
feels?
to learn Esperanto the same as asking everybody to learn English?
And
I do not agree.
Mm.
So, on one side, yes, it would be to require to the native speaker of English to face the same difficulties that the other people have, but it does not mean that that's the only point, because I'm strongly convinced, for personal experience, but also for studies about how much time it takes to reach fluency, that Esperanto is far easier than English because of the vocabulary, because it's mostly, well, not mostly, but it's far more common to compound words with existing roots instead of having to learn more roots by heart, but mostly because of the simplest phonetic, the extremely regular orthography, the lack of exceptions. So I'm strongly convinced that's not equivalent to say English-speaking people have the same difficulties. It's also to make things easier for everyone.
So it's a no. Is it
Yes.
correct? Yeah, you understand. Okay, then Michael is the next.
Okay, so my next question is why? No, sorry, I can't make a question with why. Don't you think that?
Maybe better. Do you think that's
okay?
Easier with the double
Yes.
negation?
Do you think that beside the access to written documents in translation, there is far more advantage that you can have when you use a language that you master, also in this kind of communication, when you are giving speeches, when you are presenting your point of view, and so that translation, it is a good option to access written contents, but it can't be considered as the solution for the rest of the international communication.
I'm not sure I understand the question. What are you saying about
My
translation?
question, do you think that translation is a very good tool to access written contents, but that we can't consider it as a solution for international communication because there is far more than access to written content?
Okay, so for example, in speak, you have a conference, an international conference, and so instead of saying, the conference will be in English, you say it's going to be in Esperanto. Is that correct?
For example.
because in that case they're giving speeches and such, and so you give your speech in Esperanto. Okay, so then
Yes.
what was one of my do I think that translation is the answer? No. Translation
I understand the
even
question. Like, do you agree that if you are able to have a speech in Esperanto in a language that you master, which might be Esperanto, do you agree that this is giving you an advantage, or it's better for you than if you would have to do it in English? Correct, Michael?
We can say that. Yeah.
Just want to clarify. Otherwise, you rephrase. So is it an advantage if you're able to give a speech in a language you really master
of course
versus a language like maybe that you don't
yes
speak so well?
yes of
Yeah,
course
okay, it's very obvious.
okay
Then it's a yes. Then Michael, maybe just.
So
but
we
I
can
don't but yes
acknowledge
yet but I don't
that
understand
there is a problem.
what that means in terms of argument that Esperanto is going to help solve the problem. So could you frame it in terms? So you said one issue is like with translation of written documents, and we could get into that further. But so you're saying there's much more communication going on. So let's use the example of an international conference. Could you then frame the question in that terms, like making, for example, many international conferences require that speeches are in English.
We had now a gap, Tim. I am not sure if you understood, but in fact, it's also Michael's turn to ask the next question. So maybe you just remember it, and Michael can continue with the question.
Okay. So, would you agree that it is, however, a serious issue that in an important part of the international work, there is a situation of privilege for some and there are language barriers for others? Do you agree that that is a problem, that is something that should be tackled for the sake of equality?
No.
You want to elaborate? You can. But
okay.
You don't have
the reason I say no is because
also.
just for the sake of equality. So let's say that it sounds like you're going slash and burn. Just like we're just going to destroy everything, and then bring up that's what it sounds like. Which is just for the sake of equality. So Pol Pot, for the sake of equality in Cambodia, we're going to go back to year zero. We're going to kill all the intellectuals, etc., on and on and on. Okay, that sounds like extreme to me. For the sake of equality, we're going to require everybody to learn Esperanto. So as I was saying before, that if I think we should focus on a concrete example like an international conference. Now, polyglot gathering, etc. The conference, we actually promote people giving speeches not in English, but you find that still English dominates even amongst polyglots. They choose to do it because they want more people to be able to understand what they're saying, and that's polyglots doing that. Okay, so at the last polyglot gathering, I would say that 90% of all presentations were in English, even though we represent 100-something languages, and we probably shared quite a few of them. But okay, so that's a choice even polyglots make. So but let's say that I've been to many academic conferences. The next question will be yours.
I just want to.
Okay. Mm-hmm. No, well, I'm saying
you
no.
have a little lag, so maybe I don't really always feel if you're interrupting. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yes. No.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm saying no to that for the sake of equality.
For a little bit because we are now hitting. Okay. We are now hitting nearly 1 hour of this debate. It's a long time, more than we planned. But so I want to kind of give you a chance to somewhat wrap it up because.
Okay. So my wrap up would be that first of all, I'm not anti-Esperanto. If people who want to learn Esperanto, more power to them. People who want to go to Esperanto conferences or communicate with others around the world and to travel in Esperanto, fantastic. Not everybody prefers to do that. For example, I myself find that language and culture are inseparable because I'm professor of cross-cultural management and I focus on cultural adaptation and foreign language acquisition. And so I could go into deep discussion about why I see this inseparable. And I also, because of that, I don't see Esperanto is creating a new culture amongst Esperantists, and they create a certain culture, but that culture is mainly based upon the kind of communication they do in the gatherings, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't have, it's not even comparable to the culture of natural languages. So, so the idea of that it's going to take over the role of a natural language in many areas, I don't see it. So that's why I don't see that trying to promote it instead of a natural language is a little bit asking too much. I think it's still that Esperanto is an unfair advantage to European speakers. Namely, so the vocabulary, the grammar, and phonology. So especially, okay, so we've already been over the vocabulary. That's very simple, it's straightforward. That's not. And then the grammar, I made a number of points. The cognitive categories. We don't use tense. We don't distinguish between. We don't have plurals of inanimate objects, etc. There's other points I could make. And so that's covering, like, again, 35% of the world, at least, in terms of not having those characteristics. But phonology is still, you have to learn to sound like a European. So, it doesn't sound like 要是我说中文是不一样的. Okay, that's Chinese. You can see Esperanto, if I'm used to talking like that, single syllabic, and if I speak okay, that's Vietnamese. It's just small single monosyllabic words strung together. Okay? Now Esperanto, you're doing the opposite direction. You're making these long words and certain, this, it's not phonetically, it's a totally different world. Okay, then also I'll make the last point, whether, so you've already agreed that, it's not necessarily the easiest language. The easiest language, if you have a language that's similar to yours in the same family, it's going to be easier than Esperanto, especially if your language is non-European and doesn't share all those characteristics. Okay, agreed on that. So I guess then the final point in terms of difficulty is that just because a language has a simple, straightforward, no exception grammar, it doesn't make it necessarily easy. Japanese only has 2 irregular verbs, but Japanese is really tough in terms, it has many other aspects really tough to grasp from a Western point of view in terms of politeness, language, etc. So that aspect itself doesn't necessarily make it that much easier, because so in Japanese we don't distinguish singular and plural. It's only you have to worry about. We don't have to worry about knowing how to use definite articles or are none, etc., etc. Okay, so just those characteristics of Esperanto doesn't necessarily make it easier. And also, easiness has a lot to do with your passion to learn something. So I find that a lot of people nowadays love learning Japanese. Like when we were at the gathering, my wife was with me, and at the Japanese table, many people came to it, more than most of the other languages. And they all had interest in Japanese culture. And you read a lot of young people, they're into anime. And that is their passion. And they get quite good at the language because of a passion. So it's easy for them to learn because they're passionate about it. So I just throwing that out, that ease is not necessarily something objective. It's very, very subjective in that case. And that's how I wind it up.
Thanks for the wrap up. Now, Michael, how would you summarize it?
Yes, so I acknowledge the language diversity in the world, and I acknowledge it as a value. So the goal of Esperanto is not to replace that language diversity. The goal is to have a fair international communication. I still support that Esperanto is relatively easy, and the features that make Esperanto so easier than other languages are its extremely regular orthography, extremely regular grammar, and the lower quantity of words to be learned by heart. I would like to add about the phonology that the 5 vowels of Esperanto are the 5 vowels that are most common in the worldwide languages, but also about the consonants. 20 out of the 23 consonants are, at least according to one study that is available. I'm sorry, I can't publish the link here, but these are 20 out of the 23 are the most common consonants. So, by the phonological point of view, Esperanto still have most of the most common phonemes in the word, with also the advantage to not being a national language. So it does not have a dominant accent. It does not have a country that can be considered as the Esperanto country with the best, with the normative way of speaking. So yes, of course, it has several European grammar features, but this does not make the language difficult. Its regularity and also its belonging to the world and not to a certain country makes it fairer. And also it avoids that their people from a certain country or certain set of country to be the norm and to be also the main source of culture. And I don't think that equality, I don't think that the construction of privilege is something that should be put aside, because we want to have a fair world. We want to have a world where people can have the same opportunities. Of course, that's an ideal, but at least among one of the causes of inequality, that is the difference of native language, through Esperanto, we can make a step forward towards a fairer world.
Thank you, Michael. Well, yeah, thanks for wrapping us up. Also for your questions before. I think I could definitely understand better your views. Some things I didn't know before. So yeah, was this yes no debate. If you watch this like this and maybe you disagree with someone, then I'm happy to host also your yes no debate. So please reach out to me on yesnodebate.org. And otherwise, subscribe to the channel, and you can also subscribe on the newsletter on yesnodebate.org. So that's all from my side. I thank you again for the guests, and yeah, let's have a good day. Goodbye.
Okay, thank you very much. Mm-hmm.